I chose internal medicine because I like solving problems, understanding the big picture, and identifying solutions.
I chose internal medicine because I want to provide comprehensive care and enjoy developing lifelong relationships with patients.
I chose internal medicine because I thrive in complexity.
Internal medicine is a launchpad to different career paths and a gateway to healthcare leadership.
Learn more about a career in internal medicine at acponline.org.
This podcast of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs is sponsored by AAA Heating and Air.
The premier HVAC company in the Midlands is growing. Are you a top HVAC technician?
AAA Heating and Air is looking for dedicated applicants to fill their fast-growing service department with top-notch HVAC technicians.
If you're the best, then they want you. If you're ready to stop working and start a career, you can earn up to $100,000 plus a year at AAA Heating and Air.
Quality candidates will have at least 2 years experience and a good driving record. Benefits include top industry salaries, commission on service and unit sales, set call limits, company-provided take-home vehicle and gas card, company-provided cell phone and tablet, health, dental, and vision benefits, 401k retirement plan with company match, and scaled PTO based on length of service.
Contact Roy and Dana Finley at 803-677-1500 or check out their job postings on Facebook or ZipRecruiter.
AAA Air when you need us. AAA Heating and Air.
Spoke to the press this year after some of the games that he got to play with. There's just, something you can't teach that. That's just something that you either have or you don't have, and he certainly seems to have a lot of that quiet confidence about him.
He does. Trying to figure out what did we learn that we didn't know beforehand. We obviously learned he's completely down for the video game.
Oh, yes.
So,
except we got to get him in on a little tournament next year.
So South Carolina's
saving up the money for a PS5.
Yeah, South Carolina's potential starting quarterback will be in the game, it sounds like.
Which they just, the other day, the Brander Group dropped their lawsuit against EA Sports, so it sounds like everything's on track for the game to, come out midsummer like it used to.
Yeah, let's see what else we learned. We learned Omega Blake can throw a football 75 yards. That one caught me off guard a little bit. We learned he likes the Jalen Hurts comparison, which that one kind of took me off guard a little bit. I just have Jalen as being much smaller in my head. And like you said, he's a couple inches shorter. Maybe Jalen Hurts is a little bit thicker than I give him credit for. But that may be a good comp, man. Certainly if he plays to that potential, it's not an insult.
Oh, not at all. Jalen was an amazing quarterback in college, and I think a lot of people didn't think his game would translate to the NFL, and he's obviously done a really good job, and he's one of the highest paid quarterbacks in the league right now. So, I think an apt comparison, and obviously we'll get to see a whole lot more of what Lenorris, brings to the offense next year as the assumed starting quarterback. And, as he talked about, it's going to be a little bit of a different type of offense because you add that running ability in that, Spencer Rattler was certainly capable of and cut and run when he needed to, but that wasn't one of his main MOs, and a little bit more of Lenore Sellers' game is grounded in those RPO type of things.
So I imagine this came from Charles as well that wrote this up, but the sort of profile here says, Sellers' athleticism, rushing ability, and upside as a passer remind us of Jalen Hurts. Sellers may have a stronger arm and is bigger than Hurts at the same stage. Hurts' release looked a tad more refined as a senior in high school. Both were prolific rushers and efficient passers with the upside to continue developing in that area. Sellers also reminds us a bit of Deshaun Watson and Trey Lance.
It's pretty apt.
Just throwing, like, hey, here's a lot of really good quarterbacks that hear about. And Lenorris told us that he grew up watching Cam Newton and honestly, coming out of South Florence, you heard that comparison made, right? Cam was huge, but Lenorris is a big guy. We were just sitting in here beside him, look at him out on the field. He's 235, 240, 6'3". The thing about him is, and we're gonna put ourselves in the position where the things that you say almost may get people too excited, and so we have to remember, going into 2024, he'll be a guy that hasn't started a football game at the college level, right? He's a young player, but there's just not a box he doesn't check. He checks all the boxes because he's got the size, the arm, the dual threat ability, the quiet confidence, like you said, Wes. and the football IQ. I mean, you can tell just sitting here talking to him during the show and during the breaks, he just kind of gets it, and then physically he has all the attributes you look for.
And what excites people a lot is just the raw talent and athleticism, which we got to see on display a couple times this year. We obviously talked to him about the touchdowns that he scored against Furman and Vanderbilt, and you got to see the best of both, where he just uncorks this 50-yard bomb to Tyshawn Russell, it was long touchdown Russell, the short one to Nick Harbor, and then he had that run of 36 yards for the touchdown against Vanderbilt, where again, it kind of took us inside of his head there, and the read that he made and the decision to keep it, even though he was technically supposed to hand it off there. But again, you saw a little bit of a mix of both of what he's capable of, when scoring those touchdowns. And he was even asked to do a little bit more at the end of the season when you had Juju McDowell go down with the collarbone injury. So a lot of faith in what he can do as a runner, and excited to see that on more of a full display next year.
Yeah, he's got a very high touchdown rate at this point. But you know what, guys, we're not very good at our jobs, because you know what we forgot to ask him about?
What's that?
We forgot to ask him about his grandma asking Dow if he still sucks.
You suck. That's right. Ah, man, we got to get him back in here for that.
Missed opportunity. I would imagine we're going to have opportunities to talk to Lenorris quite a bit in the future.
Gosh, we had Spencer on like 3 times in the past year. So
yeah, we'll get Lenorris back in. But also, we were talking to him off air. He's got some pretty cool merch out there. I guess we can mention them, from the guys at Palmetto Autographs. And they went all in on the old specs here.
As you should. That's marketing 101 right there.
Yeah, go check that out, man. Really, really, really well done. Very clean, very professional looking from our friends at Palmetto Autographs.
Well, and that's one of the things about like NIL that's so cool is guys, it's not just about the autographs. It's not just about public appearances. But a guy like that can capitalize on something as, I don't want to say silly, something as simple as just wearing glasses on the field or goggles on the field, like something unique to him that you can capitalize on from a marketing standpoint.
Yeah, and it helps to have Cam Newton's skill set on top of that.
Certainly does. And the type of guy he is, right? I mean, you just ask people around the program, and from the time he was recruited until now, and he's been a model citizen and everything you want. Guys, speaking of NIL, I'm going to get us off of Lenorris a little bit, but this did just come out, so I'm sure this will be talked about a lot. There's a new proposal by Charlie Baker, the president of the NCAA. And this thing is, this just came out in the last 30 minutes to an hour, so we should probably talk about it. It's pretty radical, actually. Baker is proposing a new subdivision of the NCAA that would be comprised, when you look at the criteria, it would be a haves, not a have-nots, because there's kind of a price that there's a
price for entry.
There's pay to play.
Is there an HOA with this?
Oh, I hope not. Those things are rough, but basically this would allow for a new subdivision. And when I told you about this off the air, to kind of set it up, you're like, yeah, so for the Power Fives. And that's basically
pretty much
what it would be. This is your Big Ten, SEC, and then your others. We'll see how the other conferences shake out, right? But to get into this thing, Baker says the minimum investment into a trust fund to be able to directly compensate athletes should be $30,000 per athlete, up to half of your school's athletes. So, for example, at South Carolina, or for a minimum of half your athletes, at a minimum of $30,000. At South Carolina, there's 500-something athletes. So South Carolina's in this new subdivision. Again, all in theory, this is a proposal. South Carolina would then have a fund of $30,000 at least, and it would be subject to Title IX. So there would be some equity and a split between male and female athletes, and then at least half of your athletes.
So that number would come out to $7,500,000 if we're talking about half the athletes at South Carolina and that $30,000 minimum.
$30,000 a year?
I'll admit that I do not.
Or like this is like a lump sum fund that has to be in there.
It does say $30,000 per year.
Per year.
Yes, you're talking roughly close to $8 million per year to be a part of this upper echelon, I guess, of college programs.
But here's one of the kickers of this thing, right? So you might say, well, why would schools want to do that? Well, that's going to help you in recruiting, right? If it goes to a model like that. But also, the schools that are in this subdivision would have, it's fair to say, the most autonomy within the NCAA framework that schools have ever had, because they would be free to basically create their own rules around things, and it was specifically mentioned NIL. So, for example, in theory, a school that gets into this new subdivision, that subdivision could decide, hey, pay to play, we're good, it's fine, we can do it. You know, we can pay out more than is said as the buy-in. We can, you could create new sets of recruiting rules. I mean, it kind of looks like the sky's the limit. Now, this is just a proposal. It's very, very early, but very, very interesting.
Yeah, and this literally just came out. I haven't had a chance to read through the whole thing. This sounds like to me, and we've talked about this for a while, it seems like the Power Fives are more close to breaking off and doing their own thing and maybe moving away from the NCAA at some point than opposed to working a deal out with them. This almost kind of seems like the NCAA trying to meet them halfway, like, hey, instead of leaving and going to doing your own thing, how about you work with us and we try to create what you otherwise would have maybe created on your own under the NCAA banner.
Well, and you've already got, so I mentioned, we were talking about Power 5. It's kind of Power 4. I mean, you've got Tupac out there on the West Coast.
And when you see the mass exodus of players from those schools, it's essentially going to be looked at as Group of 5 with those two schools now.
Yeah, so you got the SEC, Big 10, ACC, Big 12, right? And so, again, proposals. So when we look at this, go, man, that's pretty radical. We are moving in a more radical direction for college football. Whatever we land, a lot of the things happening in NIL right now, just by itself, are radical. Conference realignment, pretty radical. Like, all these things are different than we're used to, and so we're going to continue moving in that direction. Now, this is kind of I like the way Ross Dellinger from Yahoo Sports has a great piece up on this. Go check it out. But he mentioned, this is a conversation starter, right? Because this week, a lot of athletic administrators are going to be meeting in Vegas. There's the NCAA convention in January. So these things are going to be discussed. And this thing could end up getting kind of ripped to shreds. And, schools may have their own type of proposals or different things they want to throw in. But this, I think, is a signal that we are moving in a direction where the power consolidation is getting even more centralized to a small group of schools.
We'll dive into this a little bit more and obviously talk about the transfer portal as well as today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs rolls on here on the Game and the 107.5 The Game app. Welcome back in, Gamecocks.
Stacking Benjamins with Joe and his good friend OG not only has great financial insight, it's laid back with humor too.
Joe talks with Stacking Deeds co-host Crystal Hammond.
I've always been a fan of nosy neighbors. I want nosy neighbors. They can tell you what's going on 10 times faster than you would know.
Again, what's she talking about, Doug?
Really?
We're repairing neighborhoods, but then we're into nosy neighbors, and I built a career off of that.
Find out more by searching the Stacking Benjamins podcast, wherever you listen.
Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler, West, and Chris along with you. Before we jump back into this NCAA story, have a family 4-pack of tickets to Trans-Siberian Orchestra coming up Friday night at Colonial Life Arena. Caller number 4 right now, 803-404-6100. Again, 803-404-6100. Win yourself a family 4-pack of tickets to Trans-Siberian Orchestra coming up Friday night at Colonial Life Arena. Skimming over this story that Chris brought up just before the break there about the NCAA's new proposal, there's this debate that goes on about we'll just make athletes employees. That way they're able to benefit of the money that comes through the school, the money comes through television, all that kind of stuff. This, on the surface level, sounds like about the closest thing to that. But again, like Chris said, it also sounds like it opens the interpretation to you can kind of create whatever rules you want as a league to basically do whatever you want in terms of the money, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it seems like to me. Here's a question for me, because I've seen this put out there. So right now, obviously, the majority, not all, but the majority of NIL activities at especially current Power 5 schools are driven by collectives. We've discussed this before. NIL collectives where donors are pooling together funds, and then athletes at most places you're supposed to, and it happens here at South Carolina, the correct way where athletes are doing things like Lenorris Sellers coming in on the Garnet Trust Tower, for instance, and doing deliverables in exchange. And the question, I think, one of the questions among many that I have here is, how does that affect the current model with collectives, or will it, right? So it seems like this is partially an effort by the NCAA to, it's kind of a self-preservation thing. Like you said, Tyler, there's been some thought, will the Power Five just break away from the NCAA? This model, in theory, would save the NCAA, but it would also, add this subdivision that makes things a lot different. And so there are lots of questions in there, but one of them to me is, okay, the NCAA for years wouldn't give an inch when it came to athlete compensation. If you signed an autograph and were paid 1 cent for it, 1 copper cent, you would likely be suspended. You would be suspended for a game.
Didn't have to be money. They'd give you a free sandwich for it
anything.
And you get in trouble.
Yeah. Free Firehouse Sub. Right? I mean, you're suspended. And which seems ridiculous now, but that's the model that we lived under for so long. And because that's what they did, the floodgates eventually opened. And, man, when they did, they burst open. And so now my question is, okay, let's say the NCAA does propose a model. Well, look at the parameters there. The schools are required to keep that trust fund for up to half of athletes. And then it's subject to Title IX, of course, because it's an educational institution, rightfully so. But that's only half. So most schools would then feel compelled to do more, so maybe double that tally. Well, then $30,000 is a really nice number. That's a great number for a college athlete for most of them.
Sure.
But we all know in football, the numbers get a lot higher.
Yeah.
In basketball and baseball, those numbers get a lot higher. So I still feel like it's going to be but also this thing, right? So I don't know if I'm ready to say that certain elements that we have, such as NIL collectives, would necessarily go away under this model. They may still be important. In fact, some schools, you may see some schools with collectives that they trust. Maybe they're the ones running, NIL programs at those schools. Then you've got, what about revenue sharing, right? And I think that's one of the things in this subdivision you would also see with them being able to institute some new rules about that.
I'm just wondering where all that money, you have to kind of
got to come from somewhere.
You got to reallocate.
Sure.
I mean, I don't know what that looks like. I've said for years we're headed towards sponsorships and advertisements on jerseys like we see in other professional sports.
You're gonna have to.
So it's, hey, you're gonna get, because can you imagine now that there's only so many companies that would even be potential sponsors for that, because it would cost it's worth so much that every time you see that jersey, your logo is on it. And we're seeing that in MLB now. Hopefully there's better sponsors than we saw with the MLB umpires with the FTX, which is out of commission now, I guess you'd say. And so to me, though, you got to find different revenue streams that could maybe go into that. And the next sort of step would be logos for sponsorships on a jersey. So, hey, you're an athlete, you're wearing this jersey in front of cameras, in front of fans, in front of everybody, and then that's going to go into this pool towards this $7 million that really is going to end up being more pool that you have to pay these players.
Well, and with that, we know the loyalty of college sports fans, especially down here in the SEC, is so much more than you find in other forms of sports. Not to say that NFL fans and MLB fans and stuff like that can't be as passionate, but there's a certain loyalty tied to college football in particular. So if you are the official, let's say Firehouse Subs is the official sandwich of the South Carolina, they have a patch on the jersey, like the loyalty to that brand would be very significant. Just, and you'd probably see a really good return on investment. So I could see a lot of companies wanting to jump in on that. And again, that could be a way of getting several $1 million to be able to jump into something like this for these major schools.
Well, I think this would also open the door to something we've seen schools sort of dip their toe into a little bit and get creative with, the kind of combination of Garnet Trust, Gamecock Club, and Gamecocks Plus bundle. But this would potentially, I would guess, allow you to sort of start to provide add-ons for, in this case, if you're the Gamecock Club, and you're going to need to raise more money. Well, hey, you can get better tickets for upping your giving, and then that's going to allow this fund to grow that will then go directly to players. And I don't know if that looks like, hey, we're just going to grow the greater fund itself, or if it would be more separate, like, hey, tack on $20 a month to go to the pay your players fund or whatever, and kind of grow it that way. I don't know exactly what all that looks like, but eventually the way we're headed is less emphasis on all the bells and whistles of facilities. Hopefully the amount that coaches are getting paid starts to plateau a little bit.
Yep.
And that money gradually, you can say, oh, the money's not there. The money is there. It's just always been put into different pockets. So I think you want the amount that coaches are paid to start to plateau, the amount that you're putting into like just extras for facilities. Go to an NFL facility. They are incredibly nice, but they also are much more logistically focused on everything a player needs to succeed, not all the little bells and whistles that go into recruiting.
Yeah, they don't have TVs in the lockers and slides in the facility and stuff like
Waterfalls.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think you're going to start that. The problem right now is that the collectives are being relied on for pretty much everything.
Yep.
And so when that happens, there are limitations on, hey, where can my money go and what do I get back for this money? So I get why some fans might say, hey, I'm not getting a return on this money that I'm providing. And so I think that's the next step, though, is there needs to be a little bit more of just a reality check on if the school's bringing in all this money, it might as well be a mechanism to redirect it towards the players.
Yeah, and while we're talking about NIL, just an update for those that are curious. Garnet Trust, with the $1 million match, currently has raised a little over $250,000. So when you add in the match of up to $1 million, that puts them at over $500,000 just on this match alone. And obviously still got a couple more weeks to go. So this seems to be progressing pretty nicely.
They got to keep pushing.
Yeah, couple weeks. December 20th is the cutoff, which coincides with the early signing day, of course. So obviously with the transfer portal window open now, early signing day coming up, critical time to fundraise, and it seems to be going well so far.
Absolutely. Speaking of the transfer portal, we'll jump into the latest with that. Coming up, it's the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs on the Game and the 107.5 The Game app.
Turn on Twitter, and it's like, boom, 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 boom. You're just saying this guy's let go, this guy's let go. So Clemson went that route. I still think, my opinion is you can expect to see some level of change, within the program as far as that is concerned. And the timetable could depend on, I think, several things here. So I'll just say it like this. I wouldn't anticipate that, or I wouldn't read into it that there haven't been changes yet as to mean there won't be any changes. I think it's the most fair way to say it. And, I don't really want to speculate necessarily on which guys that might, potentially be leaving. But you see this happen all types of different ways. And sometimes it's, hey, this coach is leaving for another job, but they've been encouraged to look around for another job. And so maybe you give them time to do that. So I think you can still anticipate some things happening there.
Yeah, we are in, there's a lot going on right now in college football. And one of the things is the coaching carousel is spinning. You're seeing head coaching changes, and with that becomes assistant coaching changes, and you're seeing guys switch jobs. And that kind of window, so to speak, is definitely still open, is still going. And we're going to see that. Heck, we're going to see that into January. There's going to be, I think, a lot more movement on the coaching front. And so you do have to keep that in mind. If you're someone out there that's wondering, hey, I haven't seen any changes, that you may draw the conclusion that there will not be any. No, that window is still very much open. It can happen in a lot of different ways. And I'm speaking in generalities here, but you can see a guy like Wes said leave on his own accord. You can see a guy be encouraged to look for another job, and sometimes it takes a little bit, and they find one. You can see straight-up firings like we've seen in college football too. So it can take a lot of different shapes and forms, but just because you haven't seen it yet, don't take that to mean everything is totally status quo and will be the same in 2024.
We'll continue looking at the transfer portal, some new names that could potentially be joining the Gamecocks roster and their interest that South Carolina has in them. That's coming up. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Here on the Game and the One.
You loved Lala Kent on Vanderpump Rules. Now get to know her on Give Them Lala.
I don't know that I would call it respect that I have for Sandoval, but the world hated him. He still went out, performed shows with his head held high. He showed up to the reunion when we all were going after him. Like, he didn't skip a beat. The way he's handling it, if I were in his position, and I said it straight up to the entire audience, thousands of people, I would tell you all to and the room was dead.
Watch what Lala is talking about on YouTube or search for Give Them Lala wherever you listen.
107.5 The Game app.
To be Marshawn Lloyd, so there are a lot of big-name running backs in that class, but he's had a pretty solid career at Miami, has had some injuries, from my understanding, but has had a solid career. His father played wide receiver for the Gamecocks in the 90s and then in the NFL, now a high school coach down at Balin Jesuit in Miami where Don Chaney Jr. went. And so he's a guy that once he hit the portal, that was kind of an obvious name to look to because of the connections, because of the familiarity that Chaney had with the South Carolina program, having been there before. So he's one to watch, but there are others. I mean, North Carolina has a couple of really good backs in the portal. You got George Petway, former highly rated guy from Virginia, who's now at North Carolina and will transfer out. Elijah Green from North Carolina, who's been a starter for them in the past. Those are a couple guys South Carolina is interested in. Evan Pryor from Ohio State, who's originally from Charlotte, had a knee injury in 2022, but has been back, been healthy. He's just been behind some others at Ohio State. He's looking for a new start. I'm sure I'm leaving out some others, but there are several guys in there that South Carolina is kind of juggling and looking into, and they obviously need some help out of the portal at that position, and might be able to get a quality candidate with some of the names that are out there.
Yeah, man, I think that's probably, to me, one of their biggest needs is to get a guy who can be another difference maker at that position. You obviously feel pretty good about, continuing to bring like a DJ Braswell along. Looking good, I think, for Mario Anderson, potentially getting him back. But potentially adding a difference maker to that room, I think you start to talk about, let's go back to who we talked to an hour ago, Lenorris Sellers, and the ability to pair him up and kind of that added running game element with the potential for him to run the football with a dynamic running back and a guy who could maybe share some time with some of the other guys, I think is important. And, I think this, to me, goes back to something we talked about earlier this week, making your decisions on who do you kind of push all your chips into the table, the middle of the table on at that position, and can you land them? So do you miss on a guy because you shot for the stars on a guy? So I think that's going to be fascinating to see it this weekend. Already shaping up to be a pretty big weekend as far as official visits go. You got Jerome Simmons coming in from the junior college ranks. You got Elijah Thurman coming in from the high school ranks. You got Jaden McGowan, Gerald Kilgore, all locked in from the portal ranks. As we said, as of right now, Don Chaney's still coming in. And then there's some other guys to keep an eye on that could be in as well. Tyler Neville, the tight end. We don't have that completely confirmed on our end, but that's something that we've been tracking for a while as being a potential expected visitor for this weekend. And, I talked to Cyrus Allen, the Louisiana Tech wide receiver, who I think is like top 5 in the country in average per reception as far as, being a big play threat down the field. And he has said he's planning to visit South Carolina and could be as early as sometime this week.
Obviously, we know when it comes to the transfer portal, this is such a quick process, and there are a lot of guys that have already announced, where they're going to go for their next school. And when you have a guy that comes in for an official visit like those guys this weekend, the hope and anticipation is that they quickly turn around and would then announce they're coming to South Carolina. That's obviously not the case every single time, but we obviously know the transfer portal is usually a very quick process.
Yeah, and I think you're already seeing some of these guys, set multiple visits. Those are the ones that are going to obviously be a little bit more difficult to land. But then you have guys like McGowan, who, being a state of South Carolina, native. Then you have Gerald Kilgore with the obvious connection there with his brother being here, his brother recruiting him to South Carolina. And, those are guys where because of those connections, because it makes a lot of sense, I think you can go ahead and be tracking them as potential additions to the class, additions to the roster coming out of this weekend. These other guys, we'll see. Even with Don Chaney, I think that's a guy where you don't quite go that far yet, but there are some connections there if South Carolina decides to push and that they decide he's the back they want. It does not hurt that he heavily considers South Carolina high school. His dad played here, like Chris said. And to me, in the portal, man, you're always looking for connections. Like where's the prior connection here that's going to get us in the door? And I think with a lot of these guys, you can already see some very obvious connections.
It seems like from a volume standpoint, too, some guys are sending out that they've gotten offers from South Carolina, right? Jaden McGowan was one from Vanderbilt, Will Shepard from Vanderbilt. There's a bunch. But there's also some that we know, like guys that South Carolina is very interested in or would take that maybe they haven't tweeted out their offer, right? But if you kind of look at the volume of it, you can tell the majority of the activity is at the spots where they really need somebody. Running back's been one where they've engaged with a lot of guys. Wide receiver, there's a bunch of known offers out there. There's also some guys that, again, maybe you haven't seen the offer on Twitter, but it's been reported or that they would like them. Running back, receiver, a couple big ones. But we have also seen through the first little bit of the transfer portal window here, we've gotten more evidence to what we knew, and that is that South Carolina is looking at a whole bunch of different spots, right? So we've seen O-line, multiple offers out. We've seen tight end, running back. We've seen receiver. We'll see on quarterback, right? But we've seen D-line. We've seen linebacker. We've seen secondary. Like, we've literally seen offers go out at every spot. Right. And that's kind of what we expected going into this portal window.
We'll keep our eye on it. Tomorrow we'll actually be out at Steel Hands Brewing in Casey from 9 until noon doing our show and have all the latest updates on whatever's going on in the transfer portal.
Susie Schuster and Amy Trask present offbeat conversations and expert sports commentary as they ask, what the football?
Carson Wentz got signed by the Rams. I sat in those league owners meetings for almost 30 years, and the trade deadline was a hot topic. Push the trade deadline back so that teams that are in contention still have an opportunity to sign people. And there were other owners who said, no, we don't want players rented and we don't want fire sales. They had to make an addition, and they chose what they thought was best. I'm just not wowed by him.
What the Football? The podcast is available Tuesdays, wherever you listen.